The soft murmur of the airport's bustling terminal provided a comforting backdrop as the Grant family moved with quiet confidence through the first-class check-in area. Adrian Grant, a seasoned human rights lawyer, strode ahead, his expression calm yet watchful, embodying years of resilience and commitment to justice. Walking beside him was his wife, Nadine, a distinguished professor whose groundbreaking research on social justice and racial equality had earned her recognition across academic circles. And at her side was their teenage son, Aaron, eyes bright with anticipation and excitement for what lay ahead. This wasn't just a vacation for the Grants. It was a well-earned celebration, a rare break after years of hard work and dedication. They had planned and saved for this moment, where all three of them could escape the daily grind, reconnect, and create memories together. As they approached the first-class counter, Aaron's gaze darted around, taking in the elegance of the lounge area, where passengers in fine clothing sipped coffee and browsed the latest news on sleek tablets. The scent of freshly brewed espresso mingled with the clean, sophisticated air of polished marble and polished wood panels. "Is this really our line?" Aaron whispered, his voice a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Adrian chuckled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, son, we've come a long way. This is our chance to experience things a little differently." The attendant at the counter, a young woman with a friendly smile and attentive gaze, greeted them warmly. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Grant. We've been expecting you. Here are your boarding passes, and feel free to enjoy our first-class lounge before the flight boards." Aaron leaned closer to the counter, his eyes shining with wonder. "This is amazing," he said, causing the attendant to smile even wider. "First time flying first class, young man?" she asked, amused. Aaron nodded enthusiastically, a grin spreading across his face. "Yes, ma'am. I can't wait to see what it's like." Adrian and Nadine shared a look, their hearts full as they watched their son's excitement. This moment, so full of promise and joy, was a reminder of all they had achieved together. Years of dedication, perseverance, and late nights had brought them to this point, where they could share something truly special. With their boarding passes in hand, they moved through security and into the exclusive first-class lounge. The lounge was a tranquil oasis compared to the lively main terminal, with plush armchairs arranged in clusters, soft lighting casting a warm glow, and servers circulating with refreshments. Aaron's eyes roamed the room, taking in every detail as if he were committing it to memory. As they settled into their seats, Nadine leaned toward Adrian, her voice soft with emotion. "Can you believe it? 10 years ago, we were scraping by, trying to make ends meet. And now, look at us." Adrian reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze, his eyes reflecting a shared pride. "We've come a long way, honey, together." Aaron was already captivated by the experience, his young mind marveling at the idea of luxury and exclusivity. To him, this lounge, with its serene ambience, was a world away from anything he'd experienced. For Adrian and Nadine, this wasn't just about luxury. It was about the journey that had brought them here and the example they were setting for their son. They sipped complimentary drinks, laughing as they planned their trip and chatted about what they'd do once they arrived. Their itinerary included historic sites, sampling local cuisine, and time for quiet family moments. This was their reward for the sacrifices they'd made, and they were determined to enjoy it fully. When the time came to board, they joined the queue of first-class passengers. As they stepped onto the plane, the contrast between the spacious first-class cabin and the crowded economy section behind them was striking. The plush leather seats, the private partitions, and the promise of a comfortable, uninterrupted journey made Aaron's face light up even more. "Wow!" he exclaimed as he practically bounced into his window seat. "Look at all these buttons and screens. This is incredible." Nadine laughed, her heart swelling with happiness at seeing her son so thrilled. "Don't accidentally eject yourself from the plane, okay?" Settling into their seats, Adrian and Nadine exchanged a smile, silently acknowledging the hard work that had led to this moment. They were aware of the subtle glances from some passengers, and while most looked on with friendly curiosity, a few expressions seemed to hold something less welcoming, perhaps surprise or even disapproval. But they brushed it off, too caught up in their own joy to let the opinions of strangers dampen their spirits. Aaron was completely absorbed in exploring his seat, oblivious to the glances around them. But the peaceful ambience didn't last long. As they were settling in, another passenger entered the first-class cabin, a woman in her late 40s with an air of entitlement and elegance. Her name was Lauren Fields, and she was clearly accustomed to the finer things in life. Dressed in designer clothing with an impeccably styled bob haircut, she carried a Louis Vuitton bag that matched her designer heels. Her gaze swept the cabin, assessing each passenger with a subtle but unmistakable air of judgment. When her eyes fell on the Grant family, something in her expression changed. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a tight-lipped frown. The transformation was subtle but telling. She continued to observe them as they laughed together, and her expression hardened. With a theatrical sigh, she approached a flight attendant, her voice raised just enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. "Excuse me," she said, her tone crisp and clear. "I think there's been a mistake." The flight attendant, a young woman with a polite smile, looked at Lauren with a questioning expression. "How can I assist you, ma'am?" Lauren leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for others to hear. "That family," she nodded toward the Grants. "They don't belong here. Could you check their tickets? I'm fairly certain there's been an error." The flight attendant's smile faltered as she glanced between Lauren and the Grants. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but all passengers are correctly seated. Is there a problem with your seat?" Lauren's lips thinned, her frustration mounting. "No, you don't understand. People like them, they don't fly first class. There must be some mistake." A subtle tension spread through the cabin as passengers exchanged glances. The mood shifting, Aaron, sensing something wrong, looked up at his parents, his expression a mix of confusion and discomfort. Nadine placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "It's all right, honey," she whispered. "Just some people have a hard time seeing past their own prejudices." Adrian's expression hardened, his lawyer's instincts sharpening as he observed the situation unfolding. He kept his voice calm but firm as he met Lauren's gaze. "Excuse me, ma'am, but we paid for these seats just like everyone else." Lauren, clearly caught off guard by his direct response, hesitated, her face reddening slightly. "Well, I just assumed." "You assumed we didn't belong here?" Nadine's voice was steady, but her eyes held a fierce clarity. "Is it because we're not the kind of people you expect to see in first class?" For a moment, Lauren looked genuinely taken aback, as if forced to confront her assumptions in real time. Around them, passengers were listening closely, some glancing away, others watching intently. The flight attendant quickly stepped in, her voice gentle but firm as she diffused the tension. "Ma'am, all passengers have been seated appropriately." I'd like to ask everyone to settle in so we can prepare for takeoff." But as the attendant moved away, Lauren muttered, loud enough for those around to hear, "Unbelievable. Some people think money buys class." Aaron, young but not naive, looked to his mother, eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, did we do something wrong?" Nadine's heart ached at the innocence in his question. She wrapped an arm around him, speaking softly but firmly. "No, Aaron, we didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes, people judge others based on how they look. But that doesn't define who we are." Adrian, remaining seated, kept his tone calm but his eyes resolute as he looked back at Lauren. "Ma'am, we're here to enjoy our flight just like you. Perhaps it's best if you focused on your own experience." A few passengers murmured in quiet support, the sense of shared indignation rippling through the cabin. Aaron watched his parents with admiration, realizing that their strength came not just from what they'd accomplished, but from their resilience in the face of others' prejudice. The stage was set for an intense journey, one that would leave everyone in the cabin questioning their assumptions and values. As the flight attendants stepped away, an uneasy silence settled over the first-class cabin. Aaron looked between his parents, trying to process the tension surrounding them. Adrian placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, silently assuring him that everything was fine. But the serene atmosphere of luxury had given way to a palpable tension, filling the air like static before a storm. Sitting a few seats away, Lauren's frustration was only growing. Her carefully controlled expression betrayed an irritation she seemed unwilling or unable to mask. The murmured voices and occasional glances of other passengers did nothing to deter her. If anything, they seemed to amplify her sense of indignation. It was only a few minutes later that Lauren rose again, marching determinedly toward a flight attendant stationed at the front of the cabin. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp. "I thought I made my concerns clear. I paid good money for my seat, and I don't appreciate having it ruined by people who don't belong here." Her voice, though low, carried an unmistakable venom. The flight attendant, clearly taken aback, cast a nervous glance toward the Grant family. Her eyes conveyed a mixture of apology and discomfort, caught between her duty and the hostility of the passenger before her. "Ma'am, I can assure you," she began, maintaining a polite but strained tone, "that the seating has been checked thoroughly. All first-class tickets are valid, and every passenger here is fully entitled to be in this cabin." Lauren's face tightened, her composure slipping further. "It's not just about tickets," she said, glancing toward the Grants with a pointed look. "It's about the standard of first-class travel. There are certain expectations." A subtle gasp could be heard from a few passengers nearby, their expressions showing a mix of surprise and discomfort at the blatant prejudice. Adrian exchanged a knowing look with Nadine, who gently squeezed Aaron's hand, offering him a reassuring smile despite the growing tension. "Excuse me," Adrian said, rising from his seat. His voice was calm but carried an undeniable authority. "I don't believe we're causing you any inconvenience. Ma'am, my family and I have paid for these seats, and we're here to enjoy our flight in peace. I'd appreciate it if you'd allow us to do that." For a moment, the two of them stood facing each other in silence, a quiet challenge filling the space between them. Adrian, tall and composed, exuded the calm assurance of a man well-versed in defusing hostile situations. Lauren, on the other hand, was visibly rattled, her face flushed with anger, yet she seemed unwilling to back down. "Oh, I see how it is," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think that money automatically buys class. Well, I've been flying first class for years, and I know when someone doesn't belong. Another murmur rippled through the cabin, and a few passengers shifted uncomfortably, their gazes flicking between Lauren and the Grant family. It was as if a silent line had been crossed, one that everyone felt but few were willing to openly address. Nadine, who had remained seated until now, rose with a quiet grace that commanded attention. Her gaze met Lauren's, unyielding yet tempered with a dignity that made her stand out even more amidst the tension. People like us? Nadine's voice was clear and composed, each word carefully measured. By that, do you mean a respected lawyer, a professor, and our son? Or are you simply referring to the color of our skin? The bluntness of her words hung in the air, slicing through the cabin's silence. Lauren's face twisted in shock, caught off guard by Nadine's directness. For a moment, she seemed to waver, as if realizing the weight of her own words. Aaron, watching his mother with a mixture of awe and confusion, leaned closer to her. "Mom, why is she so angry with us? Did we do something wrong?" he asked softly. Nadine placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her expression softening as she looked down at him. "No, sweetheart, we haven't done anything wrong. Sometimes, people don't see past their own assumptions, and it leads them to act in ways that aren't fair." As if sensing her authority was slipping, Lauren turned her gaze toward the flight attendant again, her frustration reaching a new peak. "Well, I hope you're prepared to handle the consequences of this kind of disruption in your first-class cabin." She spat, her tone laced with condescension. But before she could continue, another passenger, a silver-haired man in a crisply pressed suit, rose from his seat, addressing Adrian with a respectful nod. "Excuse me, but are you Adrian Grant, the lawyer who won that landmark case last year?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of admiration. Adrian nodded, momentarily surprised. "Yes, that's me," he replied, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. The man's face softened into a warm smile. "I thought I recognized you. I read about your work. You've made quite an impact in the field of civil rights." The revelation rippled through the cabin. A few passengers who had been listening in now regarded the Grant family with newfound respect, their initial curiosity transforming into something more significant. The man continued, turning his attention to Nadine. "And you must be Professor Nadine Grant," he said with a polite nod. "My daughter is studying sociology and has been inspired by your work on racial equality. She often speaks about how much your research has meant to her." Lauren's expression shifted from anger to shock, her face losing color as the implications of the man's words sank in. She had unknowingly confronted two accomplished professionals, people who had not only earned their place in first class but whose work had impacted lives far beyond the confines of this flight. A young woman a few rows back, who had been observing the scene with her phone subtly raised, chimed in, her voice carrying a note of indignation. "So, let me get this straight. We have here a respected lawyer, a professor, and their son, and you assumed they didn't belong." Her tone was pointed, and a few passengers nodded in agreement, a murmur of quiet support echoing through the cabin. Caught off guard, Lauren's bravado faltered, and for the first time, she looked genuinely unsettled. Her eyes flicked around the cabin, realizing that the crowd's sentiment had shifted away from her and was now firmly in favor of the Grant family. Still standing,
Adrian met Lauren's case.
his expression unflinching. "Ma'am, you don't know who we are, what we've accomplished, or what we stand for," he said, his voice calm but steely. "And frankly, We don't need to justify our place here to you or to anyone. Lauren stood frozen, her face a mix of embarrassment and anger. She opened her mouth as if to speak but seemed at a loss for words. The judgmental gaze she had directed at the Grants only minutes before was now turned toward her, with fellow passengers watching her with open disapproval. As the tension reached its peak, the flight attendant stepped forward, her professional smile strained but resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the entire cabin, "we are preparing for takeoff. I kindly ask that everyone remain in their seats and allow us to ensure a comfortable flight for all passengers." Reluctantly, Lauren returned to her seat, her face flushed with humiliation. She seemed to shrink in her chair, her confidence visibly eroded. Around her, passengers exchanged glances, some looking pointedly away, while others regarded the Grants with quiet respect. As Adrian settled back into his seat, Nadine offered him a small, reassuring smile, and he reached over to squeeze her hand. Aaron, still absorbing the gravity of what had just happened, looked at his parents with a mixture of confusion and admiration. "Are we okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nadine nodded, her gaze filled with a quiet strength. "Yes, sweetheart, we're more than okay. What matters is that we stood up for ourselves." With dignity, she glanced at Adrian, and in that silent exchange, they reaffirmed their unity and resilience. It was a moment that reminded them both of the values they had instilled in their son, and the strength that had carried them through countless challenges before. Around them, the first-class cabin had settled into an uneasy calm. Some passengers offered them small nods of support, while others remained silent, lost in their own thoughts. But the air had shifted. What had begun as an unsettling confrontation had transformed into a powerful reminder of dignity, resilience, and the importance of standing up for one's worth. The flight had only just begun, but for everyone in the cabin, it was clear that the journey ahead would be more than just a passage through the sky. It was a moment of introspection, one that would linger long after they had touched down, and one that had already left a mark on all who had witnessed it. As the plane leveled out after takeoff, the first-class cabin was filled with a heavy silence. Passengers avoided eye contact, their expressions a mixture of discomfort, introspection, and in some cases, quiet support. Though the turbulence of the confrontation had passed, its effects lingered, casting a shadow over what should have been a peaceful journey. Aaron, still visibly affected, leaned closer to his mother. "Mom, why was she so angry? We didn't do anything wrong, right?" His voice was tinged with innocence, but also the dawning realization that this experience was more complex than anything he'd encountered before. Nadine wrapped an arm around him, her expression softening as she looked into his eyes. "No, sweetheart, we didn't do anything wrong," she said gently. "But sometimes, people judge others because of their own fears and biases. It doesn't make it right, and it doesn't mean we have to accept it. But it does mean we have to choose how we respond." Adrian nodded in agreement, adding, "Your mother's right. Sometimes, standing up for yourself is about more than just defending yourself. It's about showing others what dignity looks like." Aaron was silent, absorbing his parents' words. His eyes drifted back to Lauren, who sat a few rows away, staring fixedly at the in-flight magazine in her lap. Gone was her confident, entitled demeanor, replaced by a visible discomfort that seemed to intensify every time someone glanced in her direction. Just then, the silver-haired gentleman who had recognized Adrian leaned over from his seat. "Excuse me," he began quietly, so as not to disturb other passengers. I just wanted to say, you handled that with remarkable grace. Many people would have lost their composure in your position. Adrian inclined his head in thanks, his expression modest. It's not always easy, but I've learned that sometimes the best way to stand up to ignorance is with respect. Show people there's a better way. Nadine offered a gracious smile. It helps to be reminded that most people are good, even if a few still hold on to outdated ideas. The man nodded thoughtfully. I couldn't agree more. I've spent a lifetime watching people change or stubbornly refuse to change. He said with a rueful smile, My name's Robert. By the way, Robert Chen. It's a pleasure to meet you. Robert, Adrian replied, shaking his hand warmly. Thank you for speaking up back there. It was the least I could do, Robert said with a sigh. I've seen prejudice too many times to stay silent. I think it's long overdue for people to realize just how destructive it can be, especially in places where we're supposed to feel equal. As Robert returned to his seat, another passenger, a young woman a few rows back, caught Adrian's attention. Her phone in hand, she offered a tentative smile, and Adrian recognized her as the one who had recorded part of the confrontation. Hi, she whispered. I hope it's okay, but I started filming what happened back there. It just felt like people should see this. These things happen all the time, but so many don't realize it because it's usually quiet. Hidden. She showed him her phone screen, where a video clip of the confrontation was paused, already garnering views. Adrian glanced at Nadine, then nodded to the young woman. Thank you for your support. Just be careful. He added with a slight smile. People can be quick to make judgments online, too. We hope this sparks a productive conversation, not more anger. The young woman nodded, understanding his point. I promise. It's about awareness, not blame. She introduced herself as Emma, a college student studying media and journalism. Part of my coursework is on social justice, she explained, and I've been looking into how social media can help raise awareness about discrimination. This seemed like one of those moments. Nadine's expression softened. Thank you for thinking of that, Emma. Awareness is the first step to change. Emma smiled, a glint of admiration in her eyes as she returned to her seat. You're welcome, and thank you both for showing me what true composure looks like. Once Emma had settled back into her seat, Adrian and Nadine exchanged a glance, silently acknowledging the ripple effect the incident was having. This wasn't just a moment of personal dignity. It was evolving into a message that others were noticing, a testament to the strength they'd spent years building. As the flight progressed, the sense of tension gradually dissipated, replaced by a feeling of introspection. Passengers who had previously watched from a distance now glanced at the Grants with what seemed like newfound respect. Even those who had been unsure of how to react appeared more thoughtful, as if contemplating their own assumptions. One man, a businessman in his 40s with a crisp suit and tie, turned in his seat and offered Adrian a small nod. I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but I wanted to say that was impressive. Standing up the way you did makes you think, doesn't it? How easy it is to look away when it doesn't affect you directly. Adrian nodded, appreciating the sentiment. I understand. It's human nature to focus on what's immediate. But the more we acknowledge these issues, the closer we come to actually changing things. The man nodded, a reflective look on his face as he glanced down, seemingly lost in thought. The exchange had a quiet impact on him, and Adrian hoped it would stay with him long after the flight. Sitting a few rows away, Lauren continued to keep her gaze lowered, clearly uncomfortable with the silence that had turned toward her, and with the subtle but unmistakable disapproval from other passengers. She shifted in her seat, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edges of her designer handbag. Her earlier bravado eroded. For the first time, she seemed to realize that her actions had left her isolated, separated by more than just physical space. The awareness that she was no longer the center of authority but the source of silent scrutiny was visibly unsettling. After the in-flight meal was served, Nadine leaned toward Aaron, who was still quiet, deep in thought. She could see that the incident had affected him more deeply than she had anticipated. "Aaron, how are you feeling?" she asked gently, her voice filled with the warmth of a mother's concern. He looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think I understand what you and Dad always talk about standing up to things like this, but it's different seeing it happen to us." Nadine placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze soft but serious. "It's hard, isn't it? No matter how much we prepare ourselves, these situations still have a way of surprising us." Aaron nodded, a question forming in his mind. But why did she have to act like that? Why couldn't she just leave us alone? Adrian joined the conversation, his tone gentle. "Son, sometimes people act out of fear, or because they feel threatened by what they don't understand. It doesn't make it right, but it does help us see where their anger comes from." Nadine added, "And that's why it's so important to respond with patience and strength. We can't control what others think of us, but we can control how we react." Aaron was quiet, considering his parents' words. There was a newfound maturity in his gaze, a glimpse of the resilience he had inherited from them. It was a lesson he would carry forward, a reminder that dignity wasn't just a word, it was a way of being. As the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight portion of the flight, Adrian and Nadine sat in companionable silence, each lost in thought. They both knew this incident would likely leave a mark, not just on Aaron, but on themselves as well. Nadine leaned her head back, glancing at her husband. "It's strange, isn't it?" she murmured softly. "How moments like these, moments that we'd rather not face, become the most important." Adrian nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "They remind us of what we're fighting for, and they show us that there's still work to be done." From across the cabin, a few passengers continued to watch them, their expressions varying from reflective to admiring. Emma had returned to her phone, her fingers occasionally typing as she documented her thoughts, and Robert seemed lost in his own reflections. Even the businessman, who had initially kept to himself, looked more subdued, as if contemplating things he hadn't considered before. It was a quiet, collective realization. Everyone had been part of something bigger than just a disagreement between strangers. They had witnessed the power of resilience, the grace of standing tall in the face of adversity, and the uncomfortable truth of prejudice laid bare. As the cabin drifted into the quiet of night, the Grant family settled in, hopeful that their journey would now be one of peace. But they knew, as surely as they had known all along, that this was just one part of a much larger story, a story that would continue long after they stepped off the plane. For them, this journey had been a reminder of the values they held dear, the dignity they lived by, and the legacy they would pass on to their son. And for Aaron, it was the beginning of a deeper understanding, a call to continue the work his parents had started, a journey he, too, would carry forward. When the plane touched down and the wheels screeched against the runway, the passengers slowly began to stir. Sleepy murmurs filled the first-class cabin, and a sense of relief washed over everyone. For many, this would be a typical journey, a flight to be forgotten soon enough. But for the Grant family, It was only the beginning of something larger than they had anticipated. As they began to gather their belongings, Aaron glanced around at his parents, their expressions calm yet watchful. Despite the confrontation on the flight, both Adrian and Nadine had maintained a quiet dignity throughout. Aaron's admiration for them had only grown, and he felt a surge of pride in being their son. As the cabin doors opened, a quiet hum spread throughout the first-class section as passengers stood and began to file out. Lauren was among the first to leave, clutching her handbag close to her body, her eyes downcast as she avoided the gazes of those around her. She hurried past the Grant family without a word, her earlier bravado completely gone. Outside the gate, the crowd was larger than expected. Reporters and camera crews, alerted by Emma's viral video from the plane, had gathered, hoping for a statement. Emma herself stood near the exit, her phone in hand, watching the media frenzy with a mixture of awe and trepidation. She caught sight of the Grants and gave them a small, apologetic wave, as Adrian and Nadine stepped into the terminal with Aaron between them. The low hum of conversation abruptly swelled. A reporter called out, "Mr. and Mrs. Grant, could you comment on what happened during your flight?" Another followed. "Do you think incidents like this are common?" Adrian exchanged a quick glance with Nadine, who nodded subtly. They had faced difficult conversations before, but standing here, in the middle of an airport, with their son watching, this moment felt different. It was both an opportunity and a challenge. Nadine took a breath, her voice calm yet resolute as she addressed the gathered reporters. Today's experience is, unfortunately, not unique. Many people face discrimination daily, often in ways that aren't as visible as what happened on this flight. Our hope is that by sharing this story, others might reflect on the biases they hold and consider how they treat those around them. Adrian picked up where Nadine left off, his tone steady. Incidents like this show that there's still a lot of work to be done. We want to raise awareness, but we also want to encourage empathy and understanding. Sometimes, seeing others' dignity in action is enough to inspire change. As he spoke, Emma moved closer, her eyes brimming with admiration. She had posted the video with the hope of shedding light on a painful reality. But now she understood it was more than just awareness. It was about encouraging meaningful conversations. The crowd fell silent, and for a moment, the airport terminal seemed to hold its breath, absorbing the weight of Adrian and Nadine's words. Aaron, standing between them, felt a deepening sense of purpose settle within him. This was more than just an incident. It was a moment that had the potential to reach far beyond them. As the reporters dispersed, several travelers who had witnessed the incident approached the Grants, offering quiet words of support. Some were moved by the family's grace and resilience, while others seemed struck by an unsettling awareness of their own assumptions and biases. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile reached out to Nadine. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Watching you stand up with such dignity, it reminded me that we still have a lot to learn. I hope your example inspires others." Nadine nodded gratefully. "Thank you for saying that. Change begins with small moments like these, with each of us recognizing the role we play." A young man with a notebook tucked under his arm hesitated before speaking to Adrian. "I'm studying law," he began, his voice earnest. "Seeing you handle that situation well, it reminded me why I chose this path in the first place. You don't just fight in the courtroom. You carry it with you everywhere. That's something I want to remember." Adrian shook the young man's hand firmly. "It's a challenging path, but if you pursue it with integrity, it's worth it. Remember that justice isn't just a profession. It's a commitment. Aaron watched these interactions, his admiration for his parents growing with every word they exchanged. He could see the impact they were having, not just on those who had witnessed the incident, but on those who were drawn to them afterward. For the first time, he began to understand the power of resilience and integrity on a much deeper level. After the initial crowd began to disperse, the Grants found a quiet corner in the terminal to sit and catch their breath. Nadine had stepped away to take a phone call, and Adrian, sensing that Aaron was still processing everything, put an arm around his son's shoulders. "You okay, Aaron?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. Aaron looked up at his father, his expression pensive. "I think so," he replied slowly. It felt strange. I never thought we'd have to go through something like that. Why couldn't she just leave us alone?" Adrian sighed, nodding thoughtfully. "Sometimes, son, people feel threatened by what they don't understand. They might not even realize it, but that fear turns into anger or prejudice. And unfortunately, it's not something we can control." Aaron was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on his father. "But you and Mom, you didn't get angry, even though you had every reason to. How do you do that?" A faint smile touched Adrian's lips. "It's not easy, but here's the thing, Aaron. Anger can be powerful, but it's also destructive. Dignity, that's what lasts. When you respond to hate with respect, you show people that they're the ones in the wrong. You set an example, and sometimes, that's the most powerful message of all." Aaron nodded slowly, letting his father's words sink in. He knew that he was beginning to understand something important, something that would stay with him for a long time. In that quiet corner of the airport, he felt the first stirrings of a resolve to live by the example his parents had set. Before the family left the airport, Emma approached them once more, her phone now tucked away in her bag. She looked at them with an expression of gratitude and respect, her eyes bright. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I've always believed in using media to show people the truth, but today, I saw what it really means to live with dignity. You've inspired me more than you know." Nadine smiled, placing a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Remember that the stories you tell matter. Use your platform wisely, and never underestimate the power of truth." Emma nodded, visibly moved. "I promise, and I'll make sure the story is told in a way that does it justice." As she turned to leave, the Grants exchanged a look, silently acknowledging the importance of their encounter with Emma. This wasn't just a story to be shared. It was a reminder of the impact that simple acts of courage could have on others. Once they were in the car, on their way to the hotel, the family finally allowed themselves a moment to unwind. Aaron looked out the window, his mind filled with the day's events, while Adrian and Nadine exchanged knowing glances. "You handled that beautifully," Nadine said softly, taking Adrian's hand. "Every word you said. You set an example not just for Aaron but for everyone who was watching." Adrian nodded, his expression serious. "I knew that someday we'd face a moment like this. I just didn't expect it to happen here. Today." Nadine leaned her head against his shoulder, her gaze thoughtful. "Maybe that's exactly why it happened, because sometimes, moments like these remind us of our purpose." Aaron, listening quietly, felt a warmth settle within him. This was more than just a lesson. It was a glimpse into the world his parents had dedicated themselves to, a world where every encounter was an opportunity for growth and understanding, even if it came at a personal cost. As the car continued its journey through the city streets, Aaron felt a quiet resolve building within him. He didn't know exactly how, But he knew he wanted to carry this lesson forward. His parents had shown him that true strength lay not in anger or pride, but in resilience and respect. And that was a legacy he would honor. When they arrived at their hotel, the family settled in for the night, each retreating to their thoughts. They knew that their story was only beginning, and that the impact of today's events would resonate far beyond their own lives. As they prepared for the days ahead, they found themselves grounded by the same values that had carried them through this journey. For Adrian and Nadine, it was a reaffirmation of the work they had committed their lives to. And for Aaron, it was the start of a new understanding, a realization that dignity and strength were more than just words. They were ways of being, lessons to be lived every day. As they closed their eyes that night, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had stood their ground with grace, turned confrontation into conversation, and shown the world what true class looked like. And tomorrow, they would carry that message forward, wherever their journey took them. The morning sun streamed through the windows of their hotel room, casting a warm glow that seemed to promise a fresh start. Aaron blinked awake, momentarily disoriented before memories of the previous day drifted back to him. For a brief second, he felt a pang of uncertainty, wondering if their vacation had already been overshadowed by the encounter on the flight. But as he got up and looked out at the cityscape, a quiet resolve took root within him. His parents' strength had become his own, and he was determined not to let one uncomfortable incident define their experience. After a quick breakfast, the family gathered in the lobby, maps and brochures in hand, excited to explore the sights and sounds of the city. The energy around them was contagious, with travelers bustling about, exchanging stories of their plans and eager anticipation. Yet, as they stepped into the city's vibrant streets, they noticed that people occasionally gave them longer, more curious looks. Some even approached them with words of encouragement. Having seen the video online or read the articles that had emerged, the unexpected attention left Aaron feeling both proud and self-conscious, aware that, for now, they were seen as more than just tourists. As they strolled through historic neighborhoods and colorful markets, Aaron found himself scanning the faces of strangers, noticing nuances he hadn't been aware of before. Every look, every nod seemed to hold a significance he hadn't recognized before. Midway through the day, a shop owner recognized them from the online video and stepped forward, extending his hand toward Adrian with a respectful smile. "I saw what happened on the plane," he said, his voice low yet sincere. "Thank you for the way you handled it. Not many would have kept their composure like that." Adrian accepted the handshake, his face humble. "Thank you. Sometimes, situations like these remind us to stay grounded in what really matters." The shop owner nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you certainly did. I showed that video to my children and told them it's important to stand up for what's right with dignity. It's a lesson they'll remember." Nadine watched the interaction, feeling a mixture of gratitude and pride. For her, this trip had taken on a meaning that went beyond sightseeing or relaxation. It had become an opportunity to touch lives, to show the impact of quiet resilience, even in unfamiliar places. As they continued walking, Aaron lingered by his mother's side, his eyes thoughtful. "Mom, how do you and Dad do it?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. "How do you stay so calm, even when things get difficult?" Nadine smiled softly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Experience helps, but mostly, it's about knowing that our actions reflect who we are. Staying calm isn't always easy, but it's part of showing others and ourselves that we have nothing to prove. When you stand by your values, staying calm becomes a little easier." Aaron nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that his parents weren't just teaching him through their words. They were showing him through every action, every choice. This journey, he sensed, would leave a mark on him that would last far beyond the confines of their vacation. In another part of the city, Lauren sat alone in a cafe, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, her gaze distant. The previous day's events still echoed in her mind, a mix of embarrassment and frustration swirling within her. She hadn't expected the situation to escalate the way it did. But now, her actions had followed her, turning into an uncomfortable reflection she couldn't quite shake. As she took a sip, she glanced at her phone, scrolling through comments on the viral video of her confrontation with the Grants. Some comments defended her, arguing that she had every right to question the seating, but many more were critical, calling her out for blatant prejudice. Words like entitled and ignorant glared up at her, each one stinging a little more than the last. Lauren felt a tightness in her chest, a growing realization that maybe, just maybe, she had acted out of a place of fear or insecurity. She wanted to justify it to herself, to argue that her actions were harmless, that she hadn't meant to cause harm. But the sight of her own expression in the video, the pointed tone in her voice, told her otherwise. As she sat there, contemplating her choices, she noticed a pair of young students at a nearby table, glancing over at her and whispering. It was clear they recognized her from the video. Feeling the weight of their gaze, Lauren's instinct was to leave, to avoid further scrutiny, but she forced herself to stay, feeling the uncomfortable prick of accountability settling over her. Perhaps, she thought, this was something she needed to face. Maybe the discomfort she felt was a sign that it was time to confront her own biases and the assumptions she had carried with her for far too long. After a full day of exploring the city, the Grants returned to their hotel, exhausted but content. The day had been filled with meaningful encounters and quiet reflections that reminded them why they were here. The world, it seemed, was opening up to them in unexpected ways, revealing the impact of their experience and the power of quiet strength. As they sat in their suite, sharing stories from the day, Aaron turned to his father, his expression thoughtful. "Dad, do you think people can really change?" Adrian, taken slightly off guard by the question, looked at his son, weighing his response. "Yes, I do," he said, nodding slowly. "But change isn't easy. It requires self-reflection, honesty, and a willingness to let go of old ideas. Some people resist it, while others embrace it." Aaron leaned back, mulling over his father's words. "I hope that lady from the plane can change," he said softly, almost to himself. Nadine placed a gentle hand on his arm. "If we can set an example, maybe others will follow." Change often begins with small steps, with moments of realization. Maybe that incident will be a turning point for her, something she looks back on as the moment she decided to see things differently. Aaron nodded, feeling a quiet sense of hope that perhaps, in some way, their encounter with Lauren had planted a seed. He didn't know if she would change, but he held on to the belief that people could learn and grow, just as his parents had shown him. Back at the cafe, Lauren remained seated long after her coffee had gone cold. She scrolled through the video again, but this time, she watched it with a new perspective, seeing her own actions through the eyes of those who had witnessed them. A realization settled over her, a bitter but undeniable understanding that she had acted out of a deep-seated bias she hadn't even known she harbored. It wasn't a comfortable thought, and it certainly wasn't one she could dismiss easily. For the first time, she allowed herself to question the beliefs she had held onto for so long. examining the fear and insecurity that had led her to that moment on the plane. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Lauren pulled out a notepad from her purse and began to jot down her thoughts. She listed moments from her past, instances where she had made similar assumptions, though perhaps in less public ways. As she wrote, she recognized a pattern, one that had quietly shaped her worldview without her realizing it. The words flowed out, a torrent of admissions and acknowledgments that left her feeling exposed yet oddly liberated. She didn't know what this reflection would lead to, or if she was ready to change. But in that small, quiet act of self-examination, Lauren took her first step toward accountability. That evening, the Grants decided to dine at a local restaurant known for its warm ambience and authentic cuisine. As they laughed and shared stories over dinner, Aaron felt a new sense of connection to his parents, a bond forged not just by family ties, but by shared experiences and values. When they were ready to leave, the restaurant's owner, an elderly man with a kind smile, approached their table. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice gentle, "that I've heard about what happened on your flight. The way you handled it, you showed real grace. It's inspiring to see people stand up with dignity." Adrian and Nadine thanked him sincerely, and as they left the restaurant, Aaron felt a quiet sense of pride swell within him. He realized that his parents' actions weren't just about one incident. They were part of a larger journey, a testament to the kind of people they were and the values they held dear. As they strolled back to their hotel, the city lights casting a warm glow around them, Aaron took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he was just beginning to understand the world, but he felt ready to face it, armed with the lessons his parents had taught him. This vacation, he realized, was more than just a break. It was a reminder of resilience, strength, and the power of standing up for what's right. And it was a journey he would carry with him, long after they returned home. The flight home was quiet and uneventful, a stark contrast to the one that had sparked so many reflections and conversations. Adrian, Nadine, and Aaron sat in companionable silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts as they neared the familiarity of home. Though their vacation had been brief, it had left a lasting impression, a reminder of the strength they had cultivated as a family and the importance of their shared values. As the plane began its descent, Aaron gazed out the window, the cityscape of home sprawling beneath him. The events of the past few days had settled into his mind, a mix of pride and a new understanding that he couldn't quite put into words. But as the wheels touched down, he felt ready to carry that newfound awareness with him, curious to see how it would shape him. Back at home, life quickly resumed its familiar rhythm. Adrian returned to his cases, diving back into the work that he loved. For him, the flight incident had reinforced his dedication to advocating for justice, and he felt a renewed drive to ensure that his work reached as many people as possible. Nadine, meanwhile, returned to her lectures and research, finding herself incorporating recent experiences into her teachings with a new depth and perspective. Aaron returned to school, where his friends greeted him with curiosity and enthusiasm. Some had seen the video circulating online, and a few had even brought it up in casual conversation. While most of his friends expressed admiration, a few seemed uncomfortable, unsure of what to say. One afternoon during lunch, his friend Leo leaned over, glancing at him with curiosity. "So, I saw the video of your family on that flight," he said quietly. "It must have been pretty intense, right?" Aaron nodded, choosing his words carefully. "Yeah, it was. But it was also a lesson, a reminder that sometimes the way you handle a situation is just as important as the situation itself." Leo looked thoughtful, absorbing Aaron's words. I don't know if I could have stayed that calm. I mean, if someone talked to my family like that, I'd probably lose it. Aaron chuckled, understanding his friend's reaction. Honestly, it wasn't easy, but I think that's what made it powerful. My parents taught me that dignity means standing up for yourself without lowering yourself to someone else's level. It's not about showing off. It's about knowing who you are. As he spoke, Aaron felt a surge of pride and gratitude for the lessons his parents had instilled in him. His friends nodded along, clearly impacted by his words, and he realized that this experience had not only shaped him, but had also given him a voice he hadn't known he possessed. On the other side of the city, Lauren sat at her office desk, distracted and restless. Days had passed since the incident on the plane, but her mind kept drifting back to it, replaying her words and actions in a loop that left her feeling unsettled. The responses online, many of which had been sharply critical, still lingered in her mind. But it wasn't just the public scrutiny that haunted her. It was her own realization of the entitlement and prejudice that had driven her actions. Her assistant knocked gently, breaking her reverie. "Ms. Fields, the Diversity and Inclusion Workshop starts in 10 minutes. Lauren blinked, a slight frown creasing her forehead. The workshop had been organized months earlier as part of her company's initiative. But now, the irony of her attendance felt painfully clear. Taking a breath, she straightened her posture, a sense of determination settling over her. Maybe this workshop would help her start to unravel the biases she had ignored for so long. As she entered the conference room, she saw a mix of colleagues, some engaged, others perhaps attending out of obligation. Lauren felt a flicker of discomfort, suddenly acutely aware of how little she had considered the importance of these issues in the past. She had always seen herself as someone who understood the world, but recent events had shown her otherwise. The workshop facilitator began with an exercise, asking participants to write down one assumption they'd made recently about someone, and then reflect on how it had impacted their view of that person. Lauren hesitated, pen hovering over her notebook, but after a deep breath, she wrote, "I assumed that a family didn't belong in first class because they didn't fit my narrow idea of what that looked like. I never questioned why I held that belief or where it came from." Seeing the words on the page was both confronting and clarifying. She felt the familiar pang of defensiveness start to rise, but she silenced it, choosing instead to listen to the quiet acknowledgement that perhaps this was a moment of growth. Back at home, Nadine was preparing for her next lecture, one she had planned specifically with recent experiences in mind. She had titled it "The Quiet Power of Dignity: Confronting Bias with Strength," inspired by her family's response to the incident. Standing in front of her class, she began with a question. What does it mean to respond to adversity with dignity? A student raised her hand. Does it mean standing up for yourself without losing respect for others? Nadine nodded, impressed by the insight. That's certainly part of it. Dignity is about knowing your worth and not letting anyone take that from you, no matter how they treat you. It's about holding your head high, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. The students listened intently as she described the importance of empathy and understanding, of recognizing prejudice when it appeared, and choosing to confront it with calm and conviction. As she spoke, she could see her students absorbing these ideas, contemplating their own potential to confront bias in a world that often seemed divided. After class, a few students approached her. One of them, a young woman named Maya, expressing her gratitude. "Professor Grant, thank you for sharing that. I didn't realize how powerful dignity could be. It's inspiring to think that we don't have to fight back with anger to make a point." Nadine smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. If her students could take away even a fraction of what she and her family had learned, then the impact of that single moment on the plane would ripple outward, spreading awareness and understanding one person at a time. The school. Aaron found himself thinking more deeply about his own future. Watching his parents navigate the complexities of the world with strength and grace had inspired him, and he began to wonder how he might contribute to a better world. The experience on the plane had been uncomfortable, but it had given him a sense of purpose, a conviction that he, too, had a voice. One day, his history teacher assigned a project on notable figures in social justice. Aaron eagerly chose to research his parents, documenting their achievements in law and academia. But as he began to write, he realized that his admiration for them went beyond their public work. It was rooted in their personal resilience, their ability to handle challenges with respect and kindness. Presenting his project to the class, Aaron shared not only his parents' achievements but also the values they had taught him through their actions. His classmates listened with interest, and by the end of his presentation, a few had even begun to ask questions, curious to learn more about the importance of standing up to prejudice. After class, a classmate approached him. "I didn't realize how much dignity mattered in situations like that. I think it's amazing that your family could handle it that way." Aaron nodded, feeling a sense of pride that went beyond words. For him, this was more than just a project. It was a way to honor the example his parents had set and to start his own journey toward making a difference. Several weeks after their trip, Adrian received an unexpected email. It was from Lauren. She began with an apology, acknowledging the hurt her words had caused and expressing her regret for the way she had acted. She explained that she had since attended workshops on diversity and had started a journey of self-reflection. "Your family taught me more than I was ready to accept at the time, but it's a lesson I won't forget. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm committed to becoming a better person." Reading her words, Adrian felt a quiet sense of closure. He shared the email with Nadine and Aaron, who listened thoughtfully. They knew that change wasn't easy, but Lauren's message was a reminder that even the smallest steps could lead to understanding. "That's all we can hope for," Nadine said, her voice filled with gentle resolve. "That people choose to grow, no matter how difficult it may be." Aaron nodded, feeling the weight of his mother's words. He didn't know if Lauren's apology would lead to lasting change, but he understood that growth was a journey, one that sometimes began in the most unexpected ways. As life resumed its natural flow, the Grants carried forward the lessons they had learned. They knew that the world wouldn't change overnight, but they were prepared to keep standing up for what was right, to show others that resilience and dignity could make a difference. For Aaron, his family's strength had become his own. He felt ready to face the future, knowing that he was part of a legacy of courage and compassion, a legacy he would carry forward with pride. And as he walked through the world, meeting new faces and hearing new stories, he knew that every step was an opportunity to listen, to learn, and to live by the values his parents had instilled in him. The world was vast and complicated, but he was ready to make his mark, armed with the quiet power of dignity and the strength to stand up, not with anger, but with grace.